The clock on the wall showed 7 p.m., but it felt like time had stopped. I sat on the couch, staring at my glass of whiskey, swirling it slowly, the faint clink of ice against the glass the only sound in the room. The apartment, once our sanctuary, now felt hollow, just an empty, lifeless shell. The silence pressed down on me, broken only by the dull hum of the TV playing in the background. I wasn't paying attention to it. My thoughts were elsewhere. Emily, my wife, had left early this morning, the way she'd been doing for months. Her quick hugs and warm kisses had long since faded into distant memories. Conversations over dinner, the way she used to light up when she talked about her day, it all felt like it belonged to another life. I couldn't forget the day we met. She was dazzling, like she carried the light of the world in her smile. We'd met at a rooftop bar in Manhattan, and when we danced under the stars that night, it felt like magic. My friends always joked that I was the luckiest guy alive for finding her, and back then, I agreed. I'd won the heart of the most incredible woman I'd ever known. Partners in every sense, sharing dreams, building plans, and tackling life as a team. I thought we had it all. I thought we were invincible. But somewhere along the way, cracks began to form. At first, they were so small I barely noticed. She started working late, claiming her new position at the PR firm was demanding more of her time. I wanted to believe her. I even defended her long hours to myself. After all, I worked late too, growing my real estate business. But it wasn't just the hours. It was the way she changed. She stopped telling me about her day. The laughter that once echoed in our home grew rare. Her smiles, the ones that once belonged to me, faded into polite indifference. When I tried to reach her, I hit a wall. The warmth and connection we once shared had turned to silence. I kept telling myself it was a phase, that every marriage had its ups and downs. But deep down, I knew better. Something had shifted, and the harder I tried to ignore it, the heavier it became. That night, as I sat there nursing my whiskey, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. The sound of her car pulling into the driveway made my stomach tighten. I watched the door, waiting for her to come in. The familiar click of the lock echoed through the apartment, and she walked in briskly, dropping her bag and coat onto the chair without a second glance in my direction. "Hi," she said flatly, barely sparing me a look before heading toward the kitchen. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to sound casual, even though the tension between us was suffocating. "Exhausting," she replied without turning around. Her voice clipped. That was all I got. No follow-up. No effort. Just another reminder of the distance between us. Dinner was the same as it had been for months. Silence. We ate, the only sounds the clink of our forks on the plates and the creak of the chairs. I couldn't even bring myself to look at her for long. The woman sitting across from me looked like Emily, but she didn't feel like her anymore. After dinner, she went to the bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room with my thoughts. And there were plenty of those. I'd spent weeks, months even, questioning myself. Had I worked too much? Had I missed something along the way? Was there something I could have done differently? But the truth, the one I had been too afraid to confront, was that it wasn't just me. Something was deeply wrong, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I picked up my phone and stared at the screen. The investigator I'd hired had left me a voicemail earlier that day. I hadn't listened to it yet. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Pressing play would mean facing the truth, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But then again, what was the alternative? Living in this void forever? With a shaky breath, I hit play. "Mr. Carter," the investigator began. "I've sent the information you requested. The photos and details are attached. I believe you'll find them conclusive." Conclusive. That word hung in the air like a noose. My hands trembled as I opened the files. The first photo hit me like a punch to the gut. Emily, walking out of a restaurant in Soho with a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that spoke volumes. Another photo showed him holding her arm, their faces close as if sharing some private joke. The intimacy between them was unmistakable. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. While I had been agonizing over how to fix us, she'd been out living a double life. How long had this been going on? Why? What did he have that I didn't? The questions came fast, but the answers didn't matter. The betrayal was there in full color. I didn't wait for her to come home to confront her. Instead, I did something I hadn't planned. I called him. When he answered, I didn't waste time. "Tell her I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice cold and deliberate. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could almost hear their shock, the panic setting in. But I didn't give him the chance to respond. I hung up and poured another drink, letting the weight of the moment settle over me. There was no turning back now. When Emily came home later, she didn't expect me to be waiting for her. She certainly didn't expect the storm that was coming. When Emily walked through the door that night, I was already sitting in the living room, waiting. I hadn't turned on the lights. The soft glow of the city lights streaming through the windows was the only illumination. She didn't notice me at first, busy slipping off her heels and setting her bag down by the chair. Then she looked up. "Jason," she said, her voice uncertain. She could feel it. Something was wrong. I didn't respond, just watched her, letting the silence do the talking. She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room, searching for a clue. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice faltering. I stood up slowly, still holding my glass, and walked to the coffee table. "Sit," I said, my tone flat and emotionless. She froze for a moment, then reluctantly complied, perching on the edge of the couch like she was bracing for impact. "I know," I said simply, the words heavy in the air. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "What do you mean?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know about him. I know about the dinners, the touches, the lies." I set my glass down with a deliberate clink. "I've known for a while now." Emily's face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked like a child caught red-handed, trying to think of an excuse that wouldn't come. "It's not what you think," she finally managed to say, her voice shaking. "It's not serious. Don't." My voice cut through her words like a knife. "Don't insult me by trying to explain this away. I've seen the photos. I've seen everything." I reached for my phone, scrolling briefly before tossing it onto the table in front of her. The screen lit up, displaying one of the pictures of her with him, their bodies leaning too close for it to be innocent. She flinched as if the phone itself had struck her. "Jason," her voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes. "I made a mistake." "Mistake?" I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow even to my own ears. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the door, or burning dinner. What you did was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to betray me." The tears spilled over now, streaking her cheeks as she shook her head. "I wasn't thinking clearly. Things between us have been so distant. I felt so alone. I didn't know how to fix it. And this was your solution?" I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. "To go behind my back? To destroy what we built because you couldn't handle a rough patch?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But you did." I stepped closer, towering over her. "And now you're going to have to live with the consequences." Her tears came harder, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. "Please, Jason. I love you. We can fix this. We can." "No, Emily. We can't." My voice was ice-cold now, the anger that had simmered all evening finally solidifying into something unshakable. "Whatever love I had for you died the moment I saw those photos." She stood up suddenly, desperation in her movements. "Don't say that. Don't throw us away like this. We've been through so much. We can make it work. I'll do anything, counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Please." I took a step back, shaking my head. "You already threw us away, Emily. You just didn't have the decency to tell me. And therapy won't fix this. Nothing will." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the distance between us now more than just physical. "Jason, please. Don't leave me. I can't do this without you." I let out a bitter laugh, crossing my arms. "You didn't seem to have trouble managing without me when you were sneaking around." Her sobs grew louder, her hands trembling as she tried to grasp for anything that could reverse the inevitable. But I was done. Done with the lies. Done with the excuses. Done with her. "You're going to hear from my lawyer," I said calmly, turning toward the door. "This is over, Emily." As I walked away, Her voice cracked behind me, begging, pleading for one more chance. But I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The Jason who would have stayed, who would have fought for her, was gone. The cold night air hit me as I stepped out into the city. For the first time in months, I felt something other than anger or despair. I felt free. Free of the lies, the doubts, and the weight of a marriage that had already crumbled. I didn't know what my future would look like, but I knew one thing for sure. It would no longer include her. As I walked down the street, the cold air biting at my skin, I replayed her words in my head. I love you. I made a mistake. Over and over, like a broken record. But the more I thought about it, the hollower those words felt. If she truly loved me, she wouldn't have let it happen. Not once, not twice, but over and over. She wouldn't have sat across from me at dinner, knowing the lies she was living. I needed clarity, but all I had was the pounding rhythm of my footsteps echoing on the pavement. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a moment, I thought about ignoring it. But curiosity won. I pulled it out and saw her name flashing across the screen. Emily. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Against my better judgment, I answered. Jason, please, she began, her voice shaking with desperation. I'm begging you to come back. We can talk about this. Just come home. I exhaled, the frost in the air turning my breath into mist. There's nothing left to talk about, Emily. You're wrong, she said quickly. There's so much I need to say, so much I need to explain. I clenched my jaw, fighting back the anger boiling beneath the surface. You had plenty of chances to talk before now. The late nights, the excuses, the lies. You could have told me the truth. Instead, you chose to keep me in the dark while you— My voice cracked, the bitterness cutting through. While you made a fool of me. She started to cry again, the sound both pitiful and infuriating. It wasn't like that. I was lost, Jason. I didn't know how to fix us. I didn't mean for it to happen. Stop saying that, I snapped. You didn't mean for it to happen? That's the most pathetic excuse I've ever heard. You knew exactly what you were doing. Every text, every dinner, every night you stayed out. It was a choice, Emily. Your choice. There was a long silence on the line, just her soft sobs in the background. For a moment, I felt the faintest twinge of guilt, like I was kicking someone who was already down. But then I remembered the photos, her lies, the man she'd been with, and that guilt vanished as quickly as it came. I'm filing for divorce, I said finally, my voice firm. This isn't salvageable, Emily. No, Jason, she pleaded, her voice rising in panic. Please don't do this. We can work through this. I'll do anything. I don't believe you, I said simply, then hung up before she could respond. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. The weight in my chest felt lighter now, like a chain had been broken. I turned off my phone entirely, shoving it into my pocket, and kept walking. The city around me was alive. Cars honking, people laughing, lights twinkling against the cold winter air. It felt so strange, the way life kept moving when mine felt like it had just imploded. Back at the apartment, I packed a bag. I couldn't stay there anymore. Every corner of that place was filled with memories of her, of us. The couch where we'd watched movies, tangled together under a blanket. The kitchen where she'd laugh while trying to cook, always managing to burn something. Our bed. I couldn't even look at it. By the time I finished packing, it was nearly midnight. I booked a hotel room downtown for the week, figuring I'd figure out my next steps later. I had no plan, no roadmap. All I knew was that I couldn't stay here and pretend like everything was fine. As I threw the bag into the back seat of my car, I noticed something sitting on the passenger seat. The envelope of evidence from the private investigator. I'd tossed it there earlier, but now, seeing it again, the anger bubbled back to the surface. I grabbed it and ripped it open, the photos spilling out into my lap. Her face, smiling up at him like he was the center of her universe. His hand on her arm, his lips close to hers. Every image was a punch to the gut, a reminder of how thoroughly she had shattered my trust. I shoved the envelope into the glove compartment and slammed it shut. I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Not tonight. The hotel room was small but clean, with a king-sized bed that felt too big for just me. I collapsed onto it, staring up at the ceiling, the events of the day replaying in my mind. Part of me wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. All I felt was numb. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a question lingered. What now? My life, my future. It had all been tied to her. Without Emily, I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know who I was anymore. But as the hours ticked by, I realized something. I had a chance to figure it out, to start over, to rebuild my life on my own terms this time. And that thought, faint and fragile as it was, gave me a spark of hope. The days after I left felt like stepping into a void. I spent most of my time pacing the hotel room, staring out at the city lights through the window, trying to make sense of the wreckage. My phone stayed off. I wasn't ready to deal with her, or anyone else for that matter. I filed for divorce that same week. The lawyer was efficient, clinical, and almost too kind. He didn't ask for details, just the facts. I told him what he needed to know, signed the paperwork, and walked out of his office feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. Emily didn't take it well. She called. She emailed. She even showed up at my office once, but I had security escort her out. I couldn't bear to see her face, to hear her apologies, her desperate pleas for a second chance. There was nothing left to save. One night, about 2 weeks after I left, I went back to the apartment. Not to see her. I knew she wouldn't be there, but to collect the rest of my things. The silence inside was deafening, the rooms echoing with memories I didn't want to revisit. I moved quickly, grabbing clothes, books, and anything else I thought I might need. When I opened the drawer of my nightstand, I found something I hadn't expected, an old photo of us. We were smiling carefree, standing on a beach during our honeymoon. Her arms were wrapped around me, and the way she looked at me in that photo, it was hard to reconcile that woman with the one who had betrayed me. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. Not for her, but for what we'd lost. For the life we could have had if things had been different. I set the photo down and walked away. There was no point in clinging to something that no longer existed. Months passed. The divorce was finalized with little fanfare. Emily didn't contest it, not after my lawyer presented the evidence. She walked away with less than she wanted, but I didn't care. Money was the last thing on my mind. I moved into a new apartment in a quieter part of the city. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with a view of the park, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something just for me. Therapy helped. I started seeing a counselor, someone who didn't judge me for my anger, my grief, or the complicated mess of emotions I carried. Through those sessions, I began to unpack the weight of it all. Not just the betrayal, but the years of silence and distance that had led to it. I started to forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner. Emily tried reaching out a few more times, mostly through email. Her messages were full of apologies, promises that she'd changed, that she was working on herself. I didn't respond. Not because I hated her, I didn't, but because I didn't have anything left to say. Our chapter was over, and no amount of words could rewrite the ending. One crisp autumn evening, I found myself sitting on a bench in the park near my apartment, watching the leaves fall. The air was cool, and the golden light of the setting sun bathed everything in a warm glow. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. A woman jogging by caught my eye. She smiled at me, just a quick, friendly smile, but it stirred something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I smiled back, and she paused, pulling out her earbuds. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" she said, her voice light and cheerful. "It is," I replied, surprised by how natural the words felt. We talked for a while, about the weather, the changing seasons, the best coffee shops in the neighborhood. Her name was Rachel. She was warm, funny, and easy to talk to. When she finally jogged away, I realized I was smiling. As I walked home, I thought about Rachel, about the future, about the man I was becoming. I didn't know where life would take me next, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. The past was behind me, and though it had shaped me, it didn't define me. I was free now, free to heal, free to grow, free to start again. And that was enough.